Good day and welcome to the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation 100&Change Evaluation Panel Training Webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded, and at this time, I would like to turn the conference over to Lynn Van Deventer. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Lynn Van Deventer, and I work with Common Pool, and we're the agency that has been assisting the MacArthur Foundation with 100&Change. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a very short agenda. Cecilia Conrad will be providing an introduction and a welcome. We're going to do a short implicit bias training with Liz Dozier. I'm going to spend a few minutes just reviewing the competition website with you, and then I'll turn things over to my colleague Ethan Matthews, who will actually walk you through the mechanics of the scoring and commenting of the applications. And then we'll have an open Q&A session for the rest of the session that my colleague Jenny Adams will be participating in. You certainly can enter any questions that you have in the chat box. We will get to hopefully all of them. However, at the end of each section of the agenda, you're also welcome to just pipe in and speak. And if you have a question that you'd like to verbally ask, please press *1. But we would like to ask if you could just hold your questions until after the implicit bias training. And with that, I'll turn things over to Cecilia Conrad.
Well, welcome, and thank you very much for agreeing to be an evaluator for 100&Change. Some of you are repeat evaluators, so I want to doubly say thank you for joining us again. As you may know, 100&Change is a MacArthur program, a MacArthur competition that emerged because we recognize that for most of the work that MacArthur does, we, the staff and the board of directors, make the decisions about what the work will be and what kinds of problems we will focus on. And we thought it was important to have a space where we would be open to problems that weren't the problems we chose and to solutions that weren't strategies we designed. And so we created this open global competition where we invited applications for proposals to either solve a problem, take a big slice of a problem, or unlock the resources required to solve a problem. And so we are open to every theme. We are open to for-profit, non-profit organizations, and you will see as you start to do your judging that many of the projects involve collaborations, sometimes across multiple sectors. What we have asked you to do is to help us, because we really do want to engage external voices, help us in evaluating these proposals. And I want to say a little bit about the process that has led to a proposal to coming in front of you. First of all, we had 755 submitted proposals. We then had a process of administrative review to check to see if the proposals met our basic eligibility requirements. And for those of you who are repeat judges, you should know that one of the new things we introduced this time was an assessment tool that organizations could use to self-assess before they completed the application. So I think you'll find that many more of them are at the stage of being a solution and not basic research than what we had in the last go-round. After the administrative review, 471 were deemed valid, and those applications have now moved into a new process of peer-to-peer, which is actually applicant-to-applicant review, where each applicant is being asked to review 5 other applications and to use the same rubric that you're going to use and to write comments on that. We anticipate that a large number of those will proceed from the peer-to-peer review to the judges panel, but it does provide us one more sort of quality screen before you receive your distribution. We have our 4 criteria that we're going to ask you to review using those criteria. The first is meaningful. I'm sorry, that was the last go-round. The first one is impactful. We are asking, does the proposal describe an urgent problem worth solving? Will the solution have a transformative impact? Is it ambitious? And ambition could be defined in terms of trying to really solve a deeply significant problem for a small geography or a small number of people, or ambition could involve actually trying to solve a problem that is a global problem or a regional problem or that affects a large number of people. We are relying on you to use your judgment to help us make that trade-off among different types of impact. And that's an important role you can play in looking at the proposal. The second is evidence-based. We ask that the proposal present persuasive evidence that the solution, or at least the components of the solution, have been tested elsewhere, and so that you really believe that if you can successfully implement it, the solution will work. Feasible looks at the question of whether or not the team has the skill set required to implement the solution. Has the team thought through all of the obstacles in terms of social, political, economic environment that might impede the implementation of the solution? So if you think of those two, evidence-based and feasible, evidence-based is, if you can do it, will it work? And feasible is, can you do it? And then the last requirement is durable. We are looking for projects that will have an impact long beyond the $100 million grant. And there are multiple ways of thinking about durable. One is what I'll call kind of the magic pill. And that if you implement this solution, you have solved this problem once and for all, and it will never return. Those are probably a small set of problems that are out there in the world, but there are a few of them. And if I look at the last set of semifinalists in 100&Change, we had a project, the River Blindness project from the Carter Center, that involved administering a medication that if you did it for 5 years and you followed the schedule, that indeed you would have eliminated a disease called river blindness in Nigeria. The second kind of durability is a situation where once you've gotten the $100 million, you can create the infrastructure where there's an identifiable stream of revenue that will support the project going forward. It might be public funds. It might be that you will attract other philanthropic dollars or redirect them to this particular approach. I think that was the case in the last go-round with the Catholic Relief Services project in terms of reducing the use of orphanages. Or it could be that there is a private market that will set up, use the private market to, in fact, create that stream of revenues in the future. So that's another possibility. It's also possible to think about durable in terms of just whether the impact is long-lasting, even if you don't have any additional funds to distribute to it. And that's another category where you have a problem where an intervention now will create a lasting impact long into the future, even if you can't continue to grow or expand the solution over time. So those are all different ways of thinking about durability, and we're asking you to help us make that assessment as well. In a moment, you'll see how you do that on our scale, but I want to close by just saying a few things about commentary and the importance of the work that you're going to do. One of the things we heard in a review of the first 100&Change is that participants said that the feedback that they received from the judges was incredibly valuable, that for most of them, that feedback helped to offset the not trivial cost of actually completing this 100&Change application. And most importantly, in a recent survey, we've been trying to assess how successful we've been at bringing other donors on board. And we have estimated that we've leveraged about $320 million beyond what MacArthur invested that has been gone in support of top projects from the first 100&Change. Now, some of that is our money that went to projects in our very top group where we've been actively out marketing. But what we learned from our survey of the top 200 is that many say that they took your feedback, they revised their applications, and they put them in other places, sometimes to donors that they've been to before, and were able to generate revenues that they didn't think would have been possible without that feedback. So you have a really critical role to play here. As you think about giving feedback, just a couple of words of advice. One is to be as concise and concrete as possible. It would be really helpful if you cite specific aspects of the application that justify your ratings on each one of the criteria. And that's something that as we talk through the application, I'll talk a little bit more about. I'm going to pause now because one of the other things we want to do is to have you think really consciously about the possibility of unconscious bias. And I've brought on Liz Dozier, who is from Chicago Beyond, and she's going to talk a little bit about this. So Liz, welcome, and thank you for helping.
Thanks so much for having me here. So glad to be here with you and with everyone who's on our webinar this morning. Just to introduce Chicago Beyond, we are an impact investor who's focused on backing the fight for equity. And we ourselves have also run open calls for transformative funding through what we've called our Youth Equity Challenge. And before receiving our applications and even afterward, our judges went through a deliberate process. And what I'm going to talk through here today are some of those practices that we introduced really as part of our own process to ensure that we were checking ourselves on what we might be seeing or not be seeing or the value or meaning that we were giving to certain things. So a couple of questions that come up. One is when it comes to making a decision about who to fund, don't we want each judge to bring their individual perspective to that decision? And the answer to that is absolutely. But the question really is, what of our perspective are we intending to bring, and what serves in making a good decision for investing in the work with transformative impact versus what we're unconsciously bringing that might inadvertently cut against making a difference on a significant problem of our time. Let me give you a couple quick examples on how that can show up. One is just beauty bias. And in our culture, we associate beauty with success. And so there's physical beauty, but it also shows up for us in writing style, in grammar, and in spelling. And so as a judge, I might subconsciously react to how, let's say, for example, the first paragraph of an application is written. And from that, I might say that maybe that team cannot execute. And I might giving higher scores to an organization that submits an application that has really excellent grammar, really excellent use of the English language, which at the end of the day might not be the best proxy for ability to think and do differently on a significant problem of our time.
And Liz, could I just add something there?
Sure.
I think this is particularly important given that this is a global competition. We've asked for applications to be in English, but for not everyone is English going to be the first language. So please be patient and try to read through what may not be perfect.
Exactly, and it's getting clear that the point is not that a truly transformative application or a truly community-led application will either have exquisite grammar or patchy grammar, but the point here is just to be aware of the assumptions of what we connect to impact and durability, that unconscious bias that we bring. The second I'll raise today is just affinity bias. And that's when something reminds us of something that we know and that we like. And it's just inherent in who we are as human beings. We bring this greater sense of warmth. We pay more attention. And this can also work in the opposite way when there's something that we're reminded of that we dislike. So as a judge, let's say I, for example, am really particular around childhood focus. So I might unconsciously rate an application that had a focus on early childhood higher than something else. As a judge, I might have an affinity, as a judge, I might subconsciously have an affinity basis or bias for science-based applications, for larger scale quantitative evidence, causing me to unintentionally disfavor applications or applicants who have a lot of experience working with harder to serve communities and harder to reach populations. So I'm assessing that application. It's really my responsibility just to be conscious of that particular bias. So it's just a fact, like we all have bias, right? Neuroscience shows it's built into our human brains, it's how we function. We couldn't get out of bed in the morning if we had to evaluate every single decision that we had to make, and we're constantly reevaluating everything every single day. But when we're trying to invest in work that's truly ambitious, as is 100&Change, then it's important that we make sure that we're being conscious of that bias, because it could get in the way of how we look and how we assess different applications. So let me share just a couple more examples of bias to be aware of. The next is just this halo bias. And it's when we see one really great thing in an application, and because of that, we let that halo glow of that effect, of that opinion, affect really everything else in the application. But it can also work in the opposite way. Think of that halo almost as having horns as well. So as a judge, I might see evidence from a certain university, and I might subconsciously conclude that the application is more evidence-based. But only certain types of work have access to university researchers. Only certain types of work connect to data in big administrative databases. And vulnerable populations are less likely to be able to fully be counted in data sets because of how the production of evidence works. There's also the all too familiar confirmation bias, and that's when we subconsciously we look for things that back up our own opinions. And it's our desire to conform with a group that we are part of. And the last I'll mention today is just contrast bias. It's when we compare something that we see in an application to another organization or another context that we know, subconsciously defining a comparison point that may not be appropriate. So for example, a judge might subconsciously be evaluating how impactful an application led by smaller, multiple community-based organizations, how that compares to a larger institution's ability to articulate its impact in an entirely different context. And the point here is really just by pausing and bringing that implicit judgment into my conscious focus, I can evaluate where the comparison is appropriate or whether I'm unintentionally judging things that look different than what I've seen before to be less feasible or less durable.
Thank you. One of the things that I think is going to be a challenge historically for judges in this competition is that we're going to be randomly assigning from a pool of 471 applications. So it's important to keep in mind that you're getting a draw from this larger pool, and the 4 that you get could be completely different from each other. And I think particularly about this point you made about contrast bias, that's something that I'm hoping you're really conscious of. We are open to any questions or comments here while we have Liz here, and as well to the 4 criteria. If we have any now, we can answer those. And we have the first one, beauty bias and the grammar, prose, and applications. If you have one handy, it would be incredibly useful to see a concrete case study. And then there's a question about evidence framework or hierarchy that should be used. So I think the evidence framework or hierarchy is a question about the evidence-based kind of notion. And one of the things that I will share with the judges is a copy of the organization assessment tool that we prepared for organizations to use ahead of time. Because in that, we've asked organizations to think about the kinds of evidence that they have. And there is a kind of hierarchy of the sorts of evidence. We want something that goes beyond the logical argument. There should be data. We prefer that the data be collected by independent evaluators than just through an internal process. And then at very higher levels, where appropriate, we like for data to have come from different kinds of controlled studies. And those are spelled out in this application, in this assessment tool. So I'll give you a sense of that hierarchy. The question about beauty bias. Do you have examples, or should we try and pull one, do you think, Liz?
Yes, I'm happy to send out to you, Cecilia, and to the team an example of a few case studies that people can really dig into there, and so I'll pass that along to you.
Thank you. So we'll make that available to you. And there's a question about whether we're dissuading you from comparing and contrasting. And as I pointed out, you're going to see very different applications. You will likely have a draw of, we've asked you to read 5 to 6, and you'll get a different draw across them. So we want you to compare and contrast them on the 4 criteria and not on some of the other elements that are outside of the criteria that we've just talked a bit about. There's a question on contrast bias and halo bias, some examples.
Sure. I'm sorry, what was the question again?
One is, can you elucidate contrast bias? And the other asks, can you give examples of halo bias?
So for example, with contrast bias, if we think about organizations, think about a large institution and its ability to carry out a particular project or a particular mission, there's going to be a lot more infrastructure and support to do that particular project. And if we think about comparing that to, let's say, a small group of community organizations who have gathered to, Sorry, that was my alarm. If we think about a small group of community-based organizations who are gathered maybe to do the same thing, they might be more in touch with on the ground with the experience of the people, and their application might not have as it might not be as well articulated, or it might not have as much infrastructure built into it. And so the thing here just to be conscious of is not to make a one-to-one comparison. It's realizing that these are two distinct projects and two distinct ways of attacking a problem, and that each organization brings its own value. I think the point is just around the comparison.
Thank you. I am going to return to Q&A after we've seen the website, so I'm going to turn it over to Lynn for now.
Thank you, Cecilia. My colleague Ethan will be following along here on the screen. But our company has been working with the MacArthur Foundation to ensure that the 100&Change competition is open, transparent, and fair. And so I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about what we mean by that, and then I'll turn things over to Ethan to actually show you the mechanics of the training. So in terms of openness, as Cecilia has mentioned, really anyone from around the globe who met the eligibility requirements for the competition was able to participate. And in terms of transparency, everything that they needed to know in order to apply, in fact, Ethan, I'm going to have you go to the application form first, please, was published on the website so that they could learn and understand about what it was that they needed to do before they even decided to register. So once they logged into the back end, really the same information was available to them. And if you haven't already, we really encourage you to go to the 100&Change website and go ahead and begin reviewing the application so that you can get familiar with the kinds of questions that the applicants have answered and that you will see in the applications that get distributed to you for scoring and commenting upon. And also in terms of transparency, so normally when applicants come to one of our competitions, the first thing they ask is, what is it that we have to do? And so that we answer that via the application. Usually the next thing they ask is, how am I going to be scored, or how will my application be scored? And Cecilia has already gone over that scoring rubric. But if you want to go ahead and refresh yourselves or continue to learn about those various subscoring range definitions for each of these traits, feel free to go to the website. Everything is published there, as Ethan is demonstrating. You can toggle it back and forth to learn more about each of those subscoring range definitions. And then the other piece of transparency is that it's where all of you come in. So Ethan, if you just want to go to the evaluation process screen there. Yes, thank you, evaluation. So we fully describe the evaluation process under the Wise Head panel section here. Even if you just want to click on that button, we have shared all of your headshots and bios that you've sent in so that all of our applicants can know who you are and have a sense as to the caliber of evaluation panel members, Wise Head panel members that we have here. So thank you for sending in those headshots and bios. And then lastly, we're really focused on fairness. So Ethan, if you could go to the level playing field. So both during peer review and also the Wise Head panel review, every application that is being evaluated in those phases receives a set of 5 scores and comments. And that number 5 is important because that's a number that allows us to normalize the scores and comments that we receive for each of those applications. And we do this through a couple of measures of distribution, and we are very transparent about publishing our normalization routine on the website. So if that's something that you're curious about, you're certainly welcome to come to the website and learn more about it. Essentially what we're trying to do here is level the playing field. So if one applicant is assigned a judge that is particularly only ever gives out 4s and 5s, they're fairly lenient, and another judge is harder and only ever gives out 1s and 2s, what this process does is help us level out those scores so that an applicant is not being treated unfairly. And with that, I am going to go ahead and turn things over to Ethan to give us a quick walkthrough on the scoring and commenting, and then we'll open things up to questions again.
Thank you, Lynn. Hi, everyone. I'm going to go through the back end of our judging process here and give you some pointers and perhaps spur some more questions on how you'll technically at least go ahead and do your reviews for each application you're assigned. So once I've logged in, I'll click on Judging.
And sorry, Ethan, just while you're getting, while you're getting started there, I just want to remind folks about the timeline. So you will be receiving an email on Monday, September 30th with your distribution of applications. That will also include it won't include the distribution of applications, but it will include your login credentials, which will allow you to log into the back end of the system that Ethan is going to show you here in just a few minutes. And once you log in, as he will be showing you, you'll see the applications that have been assigned to you. We anticipate that each of you will receive between 5 and 7 applications to review. We anticipate that each review will take between 40 and 60 minutes each. And we just ask that you provide thoughtful and meaningful feedback. And now I'm going to turn things back over to Ethan.
Thank you, Lynn. That's a good point. I will go ahead and go over the rest of what we've got to do technically speaking here once you get into your reviews. If forever you need to, there's going to be a small tutorial, about 2.5 minutes or so, placed right there. You can always get back and view that. And always feel free to email us questions at 100&Change.org, and we will go ahead and answer any questions about the judging process that you have. So right here you'll see I've got a column of open reviews and completed reviews, and for demonstrating purposes, I'll just show the completed reviews here that this particular person has already done in our testing system. I can go back and edit any one of these up until the deadline. I'm going to go ahead and click on a new review here, one that I already haven't started. As you can see, some of these say continue, some of these say start. Note that you can also toggle between these two, or a bunch of statuses at the top here, whether it's score or organization, completion status, and it will sort them for you. So I'm going to go ahead and click Start Review. Once I've started a review, I'm going to click on the application form and registration form here. And I can review both of those. They'll remain open in tabs for as long as you're inside this particular application. You also won't be able to go past this page until you've reviewed these, obviously. And you can keep them open as you go through the process. I'm going to go ahead and click to my next step. And this is the conflict of interest form. If you feel that you have a conflict of interest with a particular application, you can go ahead and click yes, there is a conflict of interest. And then when I click next here, it'll say confirm and go out. And that would actually, when I click yes here in this case, when there is one, it'll take me out. It'll reassign that review or that application to another reviewer. In this case, I'm going to click no because I don't have a conflict of interest. I'm going to go ahead and move through the traits scoring rubric, which is coming up next. And then this, if you've reviewed the website and you just saw it when Lynn and Cecilia were talking about it, the trait scoring rubric and how this all works and the 4 traits. So when you're inside each one in the actual back end of your website here, you can move this slider and it'll select whatever answer you have for this particular trait, in this case impactful. And then I'll go ahead and lead some feedback here. And then I'm going to go to the next trait after that. And then if you notice, you get, I gave a very bad score for impactful. Evidence-based is here, and it shows you, where you've been and where you're going through the trait scoring rubric. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to score better on this one, be a little bit nicer. I'm going to click Next, and then I am on Feasible. Leave my feedback, choose my score. And the feedback does have to be 10 words or more, but that's just what the system has. We encourage you to leave as much feedback as possible. And then the final trait is durable. And I'm a little bit lower on that one. Once I get to step 7 of 8, I can leave an overall score. And this gives us a tiebreaker score in case one of the trait scoring rubrics of this application matches another one completely. Gives us a tiebreaker. It also gives you a chance to give an overall impression. And then this is a summary score. From this screen, I can get back to any of these traits and then finish out the application, or finish out the trait scoring rubric again. And then I want to go ahead and you can click Save and Exit from up here or down here. And note that it's going to give you that, but at any time you want to go back in and edit a review, you can do that up until the deadline right here. So that's an important thing to remember. But the main thing is that you want your completed reviews to sit in this column and any further open reviews to be over here. And like Lynn and Cecilia said, it will be between 5 and 7. This is a test user, so note that. You won't be doing 19. But yeah, so you want the ones that you've completed to sit in this tab. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny and Q&A, and we'll answer your questions.
Great, thank you, Ethan. Just to confirm, are we ready to go ahead and jump into the questions I see in the chat box right now?
Yes, please.
Yes, Jenny. I see a couple of groups of things that are around the bias issue that I thought maybe I'd like to address first and collect them. So there are a series of questions about where would you put track record on this series of biases? Should you discount or be suspicious of track record? There's a question about the videos and biases. And then Jose has some excellent suggestions, which I will return to because I'd like to think about how to implement some of them. But let me just comment on this. So, and it also then relates to the issue of anonymity that Jose has raised. It does matter who the teams are and who the participants are, and so you need to know that as part of your assessment. What we're really asking is that you be careful to focus on what really matters about who the team is, and in terms of their track record, their experience, their knowledge of the community in which they're proposing to do the work, the skill sets they bring depending on what the particular project is. But those are the things that you want to focus on in terms of track record and who the team is, and try to set aside the things that are not going to be related to their ability to be effective at implementing the solution. But we do think that who the team is matters, and so you need to look at that. And that's one reason why we have not attempted to anonymize who the applicants are and why track record is important. I've had a number of questions asked after the first 100&Change about whether the videos might introduce some bias. And I was very, very concerned about this because, as noted, the videos are actually incredibly useful in a different kind of diversity, and that is that some people are much more effective at communicating what their project is and at making the case for it through the visual and the verbal than they are in the written language. And so it gives an opportunity to have that other approach, that other style of communication participate in the process. I went through to take a look and see if I could see patterns at all emerging in terms of how projects were scored and who appeared in the video, the quality of the video, and so forth. And I'm really happy to say, and particularly I'll commend those of you who are repeat judges, that our judges seem to do a really good job of focusing on content, that there were projects that did very well, that were really clearly iPhone shoots with a single person and it focused in on just their head. There were other projects that were more elaborately kind of put together videos. We have communicated that to applicants and really stressed that there was no need to invest in a lot of production values for the videos. I couldn't find any patterns having to do with the ethnic background or racial background of the people in the videos or in terms of gender kinds of patterns. And so all in all decided that the videos had more value than perhaps this risk. That said, again, keep in mind what we've just talked about in terms of the types of biases that may unintentionally filter into the process. And Jenny, I'll turn it to you.
Great, thank you, Cecilia. That was very helpful. We have a few questions here in the chat box, and anyone that has any other questions, you can go ahead and enter them now, and we'll get to them. We've got about 20 minutes left. So first question here, do you prefer projects focused on a single continent, or do global projects make more sense?
We have not expressed preference for a single continent, a single country, a neighborhood, or global, and indeed, this is the kind of judgment that we're asking you to help us make. There are going to be trade-offs in every one of these cases in terms of the seriousness of the problem or the criticality or the urgency of the issue, in terms of the depth of the impact over time and so forth. And so those are assessments we're asking you to make using your own best judgment. We've empaneled a group of people, a diverse and amazing group of people. I wish we could have a big party and have you all in one room. But we've empaneled this group of people because we think we do believe that your judgment will be helpful for us.
Great, thank you. Next question, can you give some examples of halo bias?
I think we've already done that one, Jenny.
Okay. Next question, will reviewers have the opportunity to see the list of the 471 applications?
When the competition has finished, we will be putting all of the submissions in the solutions database that we have hosted at Candid, formerly known as the Foundation Center. We include critical pieces of the information, essentially the executive summary and a brief summary of problem solution and some other details. And so those will be available to everyone.
Great, thank you. I think you just briefly touched upon this, but can you say something about the geographic, cultural, cognitive diversity of the jurors?
I will. We have really endeavored to impanel a diverse group of viewers, both in terms of having global representation, and we're, I think, better this time than we were in the first 100&Change, in having diversity in terms of racial, ethnic, and so on backgrounds. We have people from very different disciplines, different sectors that we've included. We have done this mostly based on our own knowledge, however, and so you will have or have already received a survey asking you to fill out some information, demographic and expertise, and we really encourage you to respond to that.
Great. Next one, is there value to have a structured debrief of how the range of judges views? I would welcome knowing what other judges think about the applications I reviewed.
I think this is a really intriguing idea, and I want to sit down and think about how to implement it, because I think it would be of value to judges. I know that people have asked me, well, how did my application do? So let me think about how to do that. I love this idea.
Great. The next few, I think, are related to the demo. So the first question about that, how do we really distinguish differences at the level of tenths of a point? Do most people generally use the whole or half point?
So Cecilia, I can start and then maybe you can finish. So this is Lynn. So people do not generally use the whole or the half point. They generally do use those tenths of a point. However, it's really up to you, and it's just meant to be, you know, a fine representation of the quality of the application from your perspective. Most of our judges, you know, another question we often get is, well, am I able to review all of them and then come back and adjust? So that's usually how our judges kind of handle this in the system. They'll go through, do an initial review of each application, do their scoring, and then they'll come back and fine tune. However, you are welcome to do it in any way that makes the most sense to you.
Great, thank you, Lynn. Next question, where is the content of the application? And then another question about, is it easy to go back and forth between the application and filling out the evaluation? So Ethan, if you could just show that one more time, I think that would be helpful.
And Ethan, if you're talking, I think you might be on mute.
Okay, I was just going to ask, do you want me to go back into some of the traits? Is that what you're asking?
No, they wanted to know where the, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
They wanted to know where the application content.
So Ethan, if you could just
right, you can view that on 100&Change.org.
No, not the. I think they mean the content that they're evaluating. How do they get to the application
I'm sorry.
itself?
Okay. Yeah. So when you're inside of a review, I'm going to go in and continue this one here. You can click here for the registration form and then also the application form, most importantly.
And it is super easy to toggle back and forth.
Yeah, you can toggle back and forth between these two. You can keep them open during your entire time within this particular review proposal. So, you know, that's how that works. And like I said, at the end, you can edit your review. You know, you can go back in and open the same two tabs, and you can edit your review all the way up until the deadline. So.
Great, thank you, Ethan. Next question, is there a character limit in the feedback section? I know you'd like us to be clear and concise.
Yeah, there really isn't a limit. We do have a minimum word count, which is 10, but there is plenty of space to add a lengthier comment if you prefer.
And let me just add to that I think sometimes people have a lot more to say on one trait than the other, and that's perfectly okay. You may have very short comments on 3 of the traits and a very lengthy comment on the 4th, and that will be fine.
Great. Another question about the feedback. Will qualitative feedback, the comments field, be used for assessing the applications, for feedback to applicants, or in other uses?
Yes. When we get, so let me just talk a little bit about the process after the evaluation panel. So after this panel, which we've called the Wise Head panel, that makes you the wise heads, after this panel has completed its work, the top scoring applications from this panel will go in to a technical review stage. And so the sort of upper group, up to 120 or so, it may be a smaller number, will go to technical reviews where they will be matched with people with deep expertise in the particular topic area, and be given another review. And then the collection of comments from all 3 of those reviews, as well as the score. So from the peer-to-peer, from the Wise Head panel, and from the technical reviewers, that collection will come to the MacArthur board for selecting finalists. And they pay particular attention to the comments as well as to the scores. So the scores really kind of help to decide who progresses through the process. The comments become even more important as we get to the final decision making about finalists.
Great, thank you, Cecilia. Next question, very important. What is the deadline for completing the assessments?
Friday, October 18th.
Great. Next question. As a reviewer, I am concerned about technical expertise on a subject I don't know much about, or knowing a lot about a subject and other players in the field. How can this impact judging?
Yes, so I mentioned the fact that we have a technical review panel as well. And let me talk a little bit about the philosophy behind this structure. As I mentioned, the goal here is to really elicit outside guidance about what are critical problems we should work on and the strategies and solutions that we should use to work on them. This requires multiple kinds of levels of judgment, expertise, and thinking. In the peer-to-peer review stage, we are using the applicants as a resource because they are people who are close to the ground in terms of implementing solutions and may have a particular perspectives on the pragmatic issues. Those have been assigned based on some broad groupings of themes. At the end, after this review panel, we're going to have, as I mentioned, deep technical reviews of projects with people being matched to the specific projects based on their technical expertise. At this stage, we are asking for a kind of assessment that allows people to compare and contrast many different types of impact, types of projects, problems that are being worked on, different fields. And so we felt that the best approach to doing that was to assemble people who were very smart, who were very wise, who had good judgment, and who were broadly knowledgeable about issues and concerns that affect all of us in the globe, and to put that to place to help us make those assessments that require that we not just consider everything in its own silo. And that's what we're looking for here. So yes, we are randomly assigning. I know there's a later question about that. You're going to be assigned to projects that may not align with your specific expertise. We know this. Rest assured that if there's something technically wrong with the proposal, we would catch it if it continued in the process. We're asking you, and we've told the applicants that they are writing for an audience of a general audience who can analyze at a broad level impactful, evidence-based feasibility and durability based on the content in the application.
Great, thank you. Next question. Given the screening that has already taken place, should we assume that all the applicants have been found capable of handling the administration, management of their projects? In other words, handling something of the $100 million size?
In our administrative review process, we focused on whether they met our basic requirements of eligibility. We excluded individuals. We've excluded government entities. All of the organizations had to produce 3 years of audited financials, and we've looked at some basic elements like that. You will be asked under the feasibility question to ask a kind of more holistic question about the team's ability to implement the project.
Great, next question. Will there be an example of a graded application to serve as a benchmark?
And I know that this person has reviewed, Willeen, thank you, has reviewed the ACT report. And we had really tried to think hard about how to create some kind of sample, but we're stymied by many different things. First of all, there are people who have reapplied and pretty much have sent some very similar applications. So we didn't want to introduce any bias in the process that way, and we couldn't know that until the applications were in. It's hard to anonymize these applications. So the short answer is no, I don't have a sample, even though I am still trying to figure out how to do one.
Next question. Is there any confidentiality we need to be aware of while reading and evaluating?
I would ask that while we're doing the competition, that you maintain some confidentiality about the projects. Many of the projects have their videos available online, so it doesn't have to be absolute confidentiality about specifics if the video is publicly available. After the competition, some judges have asked to go back to organizations because they thought they had expertise they could provide. They wanted to connect them with other organizations, or in at least one case I know of, they wanted to connect them with funding. And we are happy for you to do that. So I will make sure that we send a word out to the judges when everything is done and finished and let you know when you might do that. Judges, just to remind you though, the applicants will not know who you are. They won't. They'll have your comments but not your name.
I think you briefly touched upon the next question, but what would be the risk of assigning work to a judge without expertise in the particular field?
And the risk is, and we understand this, is that if indeed what someone is proposing is scientifically or technically infeasible, you may not immediately be able to tell that. Although I think you will be able to tell by the types of evidence that they present to you as to whether this is a tested project. But that is the risk, and we've tried to mitigate that with the technical review panel.
Great. Next question. Can you print the applications that you are reviewing?
You may, but the system has been designed to be conducted to the reading and the scoring and commenting to be done all online. So we do not have a perfect printed version. So if you do go to that tab and print things out, it may not display perfectly.
Next question. Some of us may process and reflect offline. Are the traits shared on the public website the same as the ones in the traits? My process is to write out my thoughts and then copy paste when filling out the review.
Yes, the traits are the traits every place. The ones that peer-to-peer reviewers are using, the ones that the applicants have been told on the public site, and the one that you're using. Lynn?
Yes, and you should be able to copy and paste your comments into the system when you're ready. We do ask that you please do not wait until the last minute to do so in case you encounter some unexpected technical difficulty. However, our team is available to answer any questions that you might have. You can email us at questions@100&Change.org.
We've got a few minutes left here and a couple of questions. Can you clarify what constitutes a conflict of interest? For example, if I am a funder, my organization funds the applicant, is that safe to assume that this is a conflict of interest?
So yes, let me say a little bit about conflict of interest. First of all, if you are a principal in an application and we haven't caught that yet, please let us know, because you're not allowed to serve on the judging panel if you are part of a team that has applied to 100&Change. In other contexts, you may be at the same institution as an organization where there's a very complex institution like a university with multiple departments, or a global organization with regional offices. You are not allowed to read the applications from that institution, but you may participate in the judging of other applications. If you are a funder, this is a little tricky, and here we're going to rely on you in terms of your judgment. My first instinct is that you probably funded many projects, and therefore you would not be excluded as a reviewer. But if you feel that there's a particular, that you cannot be objective for that particular application, please feel free to recuse yourself and they will assign you another project.
Great, we have 2 questions left. How will the budget be evaluated?
So the budget is going to be evaluated at every one of these stages as well. It's evaluated in the peer-to-peer review process. We're asking you to see if there's logic that connects the budget to what they have described as the activities they plan to undertake. You should feel free, under the context of feasible, to comment if you think there's some logical issues with the way that they've structured the budget and how it connects to that project. The budget will also be reviewed in the technical review process. And then if something advances to be a finalist, and that's the last stage in this competition, which I haven't outlined, if a project advances to become a finalist, we will enter into a second stage where each finalist will receive quite a bit of technical assistance that MacArthur will provide to help make sure that they've really built robust plans for implementation and scaling. And part of that will be a real deep dive into what their budget looks like and is it realistic. So that budget will get many different looks through the process.
Great. And finally, when do you anticipate announcing the final awardee?
The plan is for December 2020 to have the final awardee. Finalists will be announced sometime this spring.
And we have one last comment here, which I think is a great one for conflict of interest. Useful metric is if you're asking if there's a conflict of interest, you're probably too close, and it's probably a conflict.
That is very good.
My only comment about, just to add to that, is that please do, once you receive your login credentials on Monday, September 30th, please do try and log in and review your list of applications for conflict of interest as soon as you can. You don't need to necessarily start your scoring right away, but if you could, please review for conflict of interest. And the reason for that is that all of these reviews have to receive all of these applications have to receive 5 reviews. And if there's an application where someone has multiple people have conflict of interest, at some point we'll run out of people to assign it to. So we just want to make sure that you do log in when you receive those credentials, and as soon as possible that week, please do review. And even if you're not able to complete your reviews right away, do try and assess for conflict of interest, if you would please. That would be very helpful for us. Again, thank you so much. As mentioned, you'll be getting those login credentials on Monday, September 30th, and you will have until Friday, October 18th to complete your reviews. Again, we anticipate assigning between 5 and 7 to you for review, for scores and comments. And our team will be standing by if you have any questions. We encourage you to send us emails at questions@100&Change.org. You certainly can do that now at any time, but if you have any other questions that we were not able to answer today. And with that, I will turn things back over to Cecilia.
And let me just close by just sharing something. You know, as many people probably feel, we're in trying times. When you pick up the newspaper every day, there's always something that kind of gets you a little upset or sad or down. And my secret to this right now is that I have been reading these applications. There are just compelling ideas here about how to really make a difference. It's just inspiring to know that there are people out there doing the work that they're doing. So I think you're really going to enjoy this process. And in fact, the hardest part will be that if you only had several $100 million so that you can hand it out multiple times. But rest assured, part of what we're committed to is to trying to find other donors for the many good ideas that we're going to uncover through this process. So I really appreciate your help. Thank you.